Tshepo Kgobe is my guest today on Future Cities Africa. He's Chief Operating Officer of Gautrain Management Agency. Tshepo, welcome. Give us a quick tour of your background and some major highlights.
Thank you, Dan. I think and thank you for having me on this interview channel. The one thing about me that most people don't know is I'm actually an engineer, despite the way, I look and dress and everything else. Everybody assumes all these strange things. So somebody thinks I'm an accountant, somebody thinks I'm in IT and all that. I'm actually a civil engineer, qualified originally as what they call it, as a hydraulics engineer. But I went into the railways immediately. I was sponsored by, the railway companies in my last year of my studies, and I went into the railways immediately. I've been there for the last 22 years, and I was just counting the other day that this Feb would be like 22 years since I started my career in the railways. I've drifted out and went into consulting, and I've done energy and mining before, and also IT and technology and everything else in between. Probably about 6 years back, I was called back to come and be part of the long-term expansion of the Gautrain. I was here. I'm one of the very first few engineers that were hired on the Gautrain when it started in 2005. I think that's when the preferred bidder was announced. I joined the Gautrain then at the earlier stages. So as they say around here, I know where the bodies are buried.
How has the pandemic impacted Gautrain and how is it planning on the recovery or dealing with a recovery?
So overall, we've had to rethink our business and rethink our business in all its entirety. It's a different way. So if you look at our parking at the current moment, only 10% of the parking available is actually in use. And what that means, it means the original model that we had, that you are attracting car users out of their cars and into public transport. With the pandemic, the challenge is that people are not that keen to just hop into another vehicle with other people. But what we've done is we've made sure that the Gautrain is clean. And it's clean continuously. So what happens is when the train gets to an end station, we actually wipe it down. If it ends at the airport, at Hatfield, the airport trains in Santins get wiped down, and even in Park we wipe them down again. In addition to that, we've just introduced social distancing measures. The commuters are returning slowly, and we were, really going. By the time we hit December, we were close to 28% of our original pre-COVID numbers, which is still not enough. And what that means is that, both ourselves and the concessionaire, we are losing money during that time. So we are running services and we're losing money, and it is a big challenge. It's just like any other commuter service around the world. We are losing money.
When do you expect to be near pre-COVID levels?
We were really working at it. And then the second wave came through. And when the second wave came through, it meant that we were starting off right down off the very low base. So now we are almost back to where we were by around November. And so we were gradually working on it. And no matter what you model, if we get hit by another wave or the winter ends up with the numbers escalating, that in itself will have, a big impact. We have our projections, and we are looking at later in coming 2022, calendar year will be, or the middle of 2022, that will be where we actually think, the full recovery will be there, because you have multiple things in play. The vaccination would already be in place. People would be much more easily be willing to travel, and the economy will reopen but you also have to think differently about the business itself. What does public transport get used for when you reopen? Because not all the offices will reopen. Most people are giving away space of their offices that they've had. So you will have to think differently.
And how has the pandemic pushed Gautrain to look at innovative procurement processes?
So overall, what we've done with our procurement processes is that we have actually managed to migrate the entire supply chain and supply chain planning onto what do they call it onto virtually. So all our tenders are now submitted virtually. They are submitted electronically in full. Our assessment of tenders is done electronically. And ultimately, all our, what do they call it? Our meetings to do adjudications and evaluations are done electronically. So we have completely migrated our supply chain on and procurement onto it took a while because we did it internally, so we didn't hire in an external consultant or buy in a system. But that way, we were able to sort out the things that naturally people who build these systems, they haven't thought of our procurement processes and our treasury regulations and the probity requirements that are there. So all of that has already been built into the system itself. So which means it's South African customized system that is able to deal with all the challenges that could happen in the real world.
And on mass transit and social distancing, what is the future of public transport?
Public transport will always be there. As the country reopens, I mean, I look at the freeways now. I was driving on the R55 in the early morning, and the traffic is already back to its normal way that it had always operated. So therefore, you will need public transport as a whole. But what we need to be able to do is bring on more capacity to enable the social distancing that you need. The ability, it will take a while before people are comfortable with them being packed into a general metro service. So we have to be able to bring on capacity. And what we've done is we've dynamically created a schedule that can, range up to what we want it to be. And ultimately get back to the 10 minutes headway, which will then allow for more social distancing on the system.
With many people moving out of the city, many companies not letting their people fully back until perhaps June 2021, what impact will remote working have on our cities and on Gautrain?
Remote working in itself will be a big challenge. And first to find challenge are the buildings you have around stations, and the rental occupancies are down 50%. And that's minimum. So that in itself, we have to think differently about transit-oriented development, multi-purpose buildings. A lot of buildings that were purely just office or residential, we would have to think about them in them being able to be both. A lot of places would have to think about what does transit-oriented development mean. It shouldn't just be a throwaway term. It has to be something that we actually enable. But the big issue with what they call mass transit, it will be how you move people at the end and at the beginning of their journey. And those things are going to be very important. If you look at the grading of your last mile services, it has to cover all the way from a bus, which is like big mass transit, all the way to micro mobility, and it has to be shared. So individualized ownership of vehicles and how the logic between ownership and access has to change. And in particular in South Africa, that hasn't hit us yet. We're still an ownership based country. So you want to own your own car. Ride sharing and vehicle sharing and bicycle sharing and scooter sharing is not yet our logic. And therefore, that's a big issue of how do we move off to the direction of the last mile services themselves. If you feel buses, what do they call it, it's too big and you want to move. And therefore, we as Gautrain have actually put plans in place to be able to enable our last mile services all the way to micro mobility. We were about to go into a pilot at Hatfield for a bike sharing scheme to be able to enable the tourism in the Pretoria area. People could go to the Union buildings, to the different monuments around Pretoria through a bike, and that bike can actually be dropped off somewhere else and doesn't need to be returned. So, like you have them in what do they call it in other European countries and the Far East. That's the. But then COVID hit, and so we had to shelve that process.
How would you change car culture in South Africa?
Car culture in itself, it's part of we are a traveling country. We are a big mass piece of land. I mean, as you see it right behind you there, a lot of the places are far apart from each other. And it's a part of our life. We're a driving nation. If you look at where we sit, despite the number of population of people that we have, if you look at where we sit in terms of our car increase, so ownership per 1,000 people, the US sits at 600. European countries sit at 300. Gauteng will soon be hitting 400, which means we have surpassed most European cities. But you cannot deal with the car culture without providing proper public transport. Because the question that everybody will ask you is, what is the alternative? And that's where Gautrain and services like that actually fit in. If you are able to explain to somebody who would naturally go to their account, what is the alternative to them, and being able to cover their, what I call total trip planning. Because when you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do the following, you don't think of it in segments. You say, oh, I'll go to Hatfield Station and I'll figure it out when I get there. And then I'll take the train and then I'll get to it and I'll figure it out when I get there. No, you gotta see your entire trip in full and think of it and the minute anybody has gaps that cannot be filled in. So the second layer of that, of you beyond providing proper public transport, is the fact that you have to provide information. You have to provide trip planning to people, and people have to have information totally accessible to them. And anytime, and your information mustn't have gaps. And we must have services all around, including the first mile services and the last mile services. Through that, whenever people see the ease of travel that does not involve their vehicles, then they are able to think differently about it. The other way of doing it is for us to think of partnerships. So what we have right now, we have a partnership with Discovery, where Discovery actually say to their Discovery Insure customers, if you travel on the Gautrain and you don't use your vehicle on the freeway all the way, so the trunk travel is done through the Gautrain, then we will reimburse you a certain amount of your Gautrain travel. Now, what that does is it says to somebody, you don't need to drive your car all the way to Sandton. You can drop it off in Turon, in Hatfield, and therefore find the benefit. And it's partnerships like that that will long-term encourage. And once the tipping point is reached, then you're going to find that naturally it's not a logical way of doing things. Having lived in what they call it in European cities when I was younger and I was developing my career, I loathed living more than 10 kilometers away from where I work. And I actually do not like the idea of actually driving to work. I used to walk to work all the time when I lived there. And to me, I find it very strange that our natural mode for going to work is for us to drive. And it has to be. So it's an integrated solution. Provide areas that are built up in and around stations. So that's the first bit of transit-oriented development. And then from then onwards, then provide a public transport that is functional, and then provide information on how to get hold of that public transport. And that's the easiest way that you gradually start to, carve off the issue of car culture. It's not as simple as that. It's layers and layers, and it's not one entity that's going to do it. It's multiple people that will have to act on it.
Well, with Gautrain as a cluster for smart mobility technology, what are Gautrain's plans for integrating with other modes of transport? And what direction is your local technology incubation and partnership strategy going?
So first and foremost, as you've always known, then I work privately and then I do my announcements a little bit later. So what we've already done is that the entire ticketing system of the Gautrain actually accepts all the other ticketing systems. So it accepts Rea Vaya, it accepts Arieng, it accepts Harambe's ticket. And as long as you have stored travel rights, so you have your pay-as-you-go pocket of your ticket loaded, then you'll be able to use the Gautrain itself. And then what we've actually enabled is we enabled the use of credit cards on the system, or prepaid credit cards, preloaded cards that are EMV compliant can then actually be used on the Gautrain itself. But we gotta go beyond the technology. So what we're doing now, first is deal with the technology issues as I had layered it on the original, on the previous question. We actually have to enable all the modes of transport to be visible within the Gautrain app. And we are redoing our app so that it can actually bring on all of that. We've had some few issues with APIs and the background information that lies in there, but we've resolved parts of that. But we actually have to do an upgrade to the app itself. I mean, if somebody could look at the app and says, "This app is new. Why are you upgrading it?" I'm upgrading it so that I make it easier for people to be able to find information. And then from then onwards, then you then have to be able to make sure that all the modes of transport have the ability to be visible, because it's one thing to say I'm going to make information visible, and then you have no trackers on minibuses. What we have is we have minibus routes, and those minibus routes have already been mapped. With the Department of Transport, we've been working with the CSIR to map the entire minibus routes as they are, and to dynamically make sure that that information is upgraded on a yearly basis, so that when we load it up in trip planners, and then the next level of it is for us to then ensure that we have the single ticket. But the single ticket in itself is of no use information-wise or data-wise if you do not ensure that you have a system-wide, APTMS, the way of being able to track what services are where at what time. And that in itself is a bit of a challenge, because then you're asking, the different industries to be trackable. And we will have multiple challenges, and I don't anticipate. But the relationship that the MEC has built with public transport, and in particular with the taxi industry, will enable a lot of things to happen much faster. I mean, we've been working on this thing for the last 3 years, and I've been talking about it for a while. But now it's time to move. And as you've seen, the Premier has enabled it in his State of the Province address on how do we move forward.
I'm curious to know, what are your plans for expansion of the Gautrain? And I'm in particular interested in the new Lanseria Smart City project that's been announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa.
It is an important question, and it's a question that everybody's keen on. So every time when I do this, I always tell a lot of people, the line is going to Soweto, in particular it will terminate in Jabulani. But if you live in the West, it's not going near your house, because everybody tries to tell me, like, where's the line going? I said, no, not near your house, just a little bit further to the right. But the line will go through Randburg, then so it will leave Sandton. We have thoughts of building a second Sandton station, which will service the Western Line, and then go through Randburg, and then from Randburg, then go to Cosmo City near the Dome, and then from there it will go to Little Falls, Roodepoort, and then to Jabulani. That line in itself, it's actually the connection point for the Lanseria line. But the Lanseria line in itself has multiple challenges. So there's no physical city there at the current moment. So PPPs have to have demand. Demand is the core of PPPs. And by their nature, if I cannot prove demand and it's projected demand, we find ourselves with that city sitting right at the back and into phase 5. But we are working with the Lanseria City development and developers in such a way that we are able to see what other solutions can we look at. And we're also exploring things like light rail, tram trains and things like that. So everything is in the mix, and we are looking forward to being able to enable the Lanseria city. And as I say to a lot of people, everybody is after the Gautrain type service. We have to be careful about whether is it the Gautrain or a Gautrain type service. If you ran any other service there and it was run efficiently and reliably as the Gautrain, you don't physically need a railway line there immediately. You can actually build a city and then gradually bring on, a bus service, a light rail service, and then eventually upgrade to a full rail service later on.
What are the main lessons taken from 2020, and how can Gautrain address them to not only survive but to thrive in the future?
So a lot of the things that we've learned in Gautrain is everybody talks about how do you build forward? How do you think logically about how do you do something today that will benefit your future endeavors all the time? Because one of the things that most people make a mistake with is implement something for the sake of COVID. And when you do that, what ends up happening, and you don't think about the lifetime evolution of what you want to do, then the challenge is that you then are stuck with sunk costs. And the biggest lesson learned in 2020 was the fact that we are able to actually do a whole lot of things to create a way in which people are safe, to create social distancing, to create an environment that works. But that environment that works can actually be used long-term wise to do other things. So let me give you an example. So as we update our app, one of the things that we're bringing forward is the ability for you to book a seat on the Gautrain. When we say book a seat, I don't mean like physically saying, I'm going to sit on 63A on coach number 4. It is a question of you being able to say, at what time can I travel? So can I travel on the 7:30 train? And the app will say to you, no, the train already, with the number of people that have requested that service, it's full. And then suggest another 2 services that you could take that are near to that service 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after. And therefore, you are able to view which trains are full, which are not full. And if the services adjacent to that one are also full, the system will automatically show you services that have not been requested that much. We're not preventing you from traveling when you want, but we're just letting you know upfront that social distancing might be a bit of a challenge. And long-term wise, that allows me to be able to, for lack of a better phrase, flatten the curve when it comes to the peak in the morning. Because the peak in the morning, it's at a specific point, and it's at that point that you physically even can't add more trains. It's you either add services adjacent to that one. But if we could actually be able to get people to travel much earlier and travel much later, then you can do social distancing, but long-term wise, I can manage overcrowding using the same system. And that is one of the key lessons learned on how do we develop systems in such a way that they can be reused post a particular disruption.
And I know you like the smart city, future city conversation. How do you see our cities change over the next 5 years in general, and what are you hoping to see?
So our cities themselves would have to find multiple uses, and we have to not only re-inhabit certain parts of what they call it of Gauteng, the rejuvenation of the central part of Johannesburg. It's not an option. It's a way in which we actually have to live. It's us being able to use buildings for multiple purposes than what we've done before. But beyond that, then what the conversation we've been having over and over again, there's going to be numerous clusters of cities and new cities that are going to be built in and around transit points. For instance, we are already in the conversation with Waterfall City about them building Waterfall City 2, which will be right behind the Gautrain depot. And that will come with a new Gautrain station. And that Gautrain station would then enable a transit-oriented development in and around it. And it's a massive city. It's bigger than Waterfall 1. If you think Waterfall 1 is big, you have to look at the planning on this thing. This includes an industrial park, an office complex, a multi-use purpose center, a 15-seater stadium right at the back of what do they call it, of that land. And in addition to that, everything is going to be, we're going towards what's called a 15-minute city. Can I be 15 minutes away from everywhere else? In Gauteng, literally speaking, if you look at my office and you look what Midrand Station is, you are literally 20 minutes from everywhere. I'm 20 minutes from Pretoria Central. I'm 20 minutes away from Central Johannesburg. And I'm literally 20 minutes away from the airport, which means I'm also 20 minutes away from Kempton Park. So the 15-minute city or the 20-minute city, as Google adopted as what they call it, as Gauteng, will be the mode by which we build. If you are not away from where you need to be, or you cannot walk 10 minutes to get to your transit point so that you can ride out 20 minutes to the next place that you want to be, then we've built in the wrong place. And the biggest challenge is it's not dealing with the urban sprawl, but enabling transport in the urban sprawl in such a way that you're always 20 minutes from everywhere you want to